What's up, Northwest? My name is Boston Mendenhall, and this is Behind the Huddle. Today's episode is with bowling boys head coach, Coach Kerr. Coach Kerr has been on the bowling team since around 2020, when he initially took the position as head coach. Since then, he has been very successful in his endeavors, bringing them to a championship, and then also winning that championship, but also just being a great inspiration and a good leader for all the boys on the bowling team. A lot of you may recognize him from Prairie View, where he was an English teacher. He still is there, but doesn't teach English anymore. But anyways, this interview is at Prairie View, so sorry if it's a bit off or anything like that. But I mean, you do what you got to do to get these things done. But anyways, this is Coach Kerr. Blah 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 intro or anything like that, but I just welcome to the show, Coach Kerr.
Thanks for having me.
So kind of take us to the beginning of how you kind of got into bowling, because I know that bowling isn't exactly probably a sport you would think of like, oh, like super like big kind of person, I guess. So not like a star quarterback or anything like that. It's kind of one of the more less known and also like ones that I feel like aren't super nationally recognized as much.
Mm-hmm. I got into bowling just as a kid. My parents did leagues for fun, so I'd been around bowling alleys. I did intramural bowling in middle school, and then every summer you got to bowl one game for free in the summer, so I always did that.
Mm-hmm.
So just more as a social thing with buddies. And I never really got competitive with it. So I didn't do any competitions, just more like for fun. It's always kind of been a part of my life that I just do a few times a year. And when this coaching opportunity came up, I kind of circled back to getting more into it.
Mm-hmm. How did the coaching role initially open up, and like what was that interview process like trying to get the job?
Well, it opened up during COVID. So it was an indoor sport during COVID. So there were 0 other applicants. I showed up to that interview wanting to hear some ideas as to what a bowling coach was. I never had a bowling coach. I had a few mentors, but nothing official. I was never like on a bowling team.
Yeah.
So I got to do a lot. And as I showed up to that interview, it was more me learning about what the role was and them being like, okay, you're going to do this. So it was a nice little shove into a fun new career.
Yeah. Okay. So kind of going into the start of bowling, I previously had an interview with Robert, so we kind of, at least if the listeners listen to that one, they should be able to understand kind of what the whole prospect of bowling is.
Mm-hmm.
But going into kind of a season, how do you approach after like coming off of like a season going into like a preseason? Like what is your kind of mentalities and what try to like values and stuff you try to instill into your team, whether that's changed from last year or just to repeat in the same year so you can like have a good program?
Yeah, during the off season, there's some rules like we can have contact with our players, but we can't actually coach them, but we can still set things up. So I know for like soccer, which I coach as well, we'd set up open gyms. For bowling, what I do is just we set up a time where they can go over to Warrior Lanes and still be together and bowl. Yeah. I can be there too, but like I said, I just can't coach or bowl with them or anything like that. So I'd say the off season, my main focus is keeping them together as a unit and just having them gel and become a little more cohesive. It's not so much on the tactics side, but just on the just keeping everyone in contact, feeling friendly, so that when the season does come back around, we're ready to roll with the tactics.
Yeah. So I had a lot of conversations with some previous like people who are on the team or everything like that, trying to in preparation for this interview. And some of the questions that they had for you was like when it comes to your strategy, when picking the difference between like putting someone on a varsity spot, like how do you different words are hard. How do you make the difference, or like what goes in your decision making to put someone over someone else, especially when it comes to bowling? Because obviously it's very much scores, but a lot of people sometimes will perform better in practice versus like in games.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I definitely have a few bowlers who are gamers where so we don't just go off of averages, because that really doesn't tell the whole story, especially because averages at our house in Warrior Lanes don't necessarily tell you how a kid's going to travel, because all of the lanes play very, very differently.
So
It's actually circles back to what I said in preseason, which is who's gelling and working together. Because in a bowling meet, you don't just bowl individual games, you bowl Baker games. And that's how you get to state. It's 5 kids bowling 2 frames apiece. So we need those kids being able to talk to each other, being able to get reads off the lane from each other. So it's weird to say, but you don't just go off average. You have to go about how does the kid travel and how are they going to be a good collaborative teammate.
Yeah, and you feel like you've gained intuition over the past few seasons on like when to and when not to pull certain people or replace people, like to help with the dynamic.
We just kind of phrase it a little more positive, like we're just going to rotate. And so our goal is we want to find our best 6 by February, 7 if you count an alternate, and we're going to give more than 6 or 7 kids that opportunity throughout the year. So not only is it just rotating to give kids breaks if we need to, or to give other kids looks, it's to, if a JV kid's earned it, then they earned it. And in the regular season, I'm willing to give a higher level JV kid a look, even if we know they're probably not going to be there in the postseason. That's going to give them that experience for the next couple of years when we will need them.
Right behind you, there's this bowling poster that has all the guys on it, right? So you said there's 6 people on a roster, 7 with the alternate usually. Like how, over the past few seasons, obviously you weren't here since like the inception, but you're here since COVID, has like the competition either gotten better or just like more people have shown up to like make it more competitive?
I'd say not so much. The competition's always been good, and the CIML's got some great teams. So we always have a challenge just to win conference. Our goal is always to get to state and perform as best as we can there. But shoot, what was the question, man?
Like how do you like manage with more people? Like obviously there's a ton of people go out.
Yeah, so we've actually had more people come out in the past because we were combined with ADM. And so they split. We still have like a decent amount come out, but it's not, I'll circle back to your point about like the big football player. What I do appreciate that's happened in the last 5 years is we're now kind of seen as a legitimate sport, just like everyone else. Yeah. So it's not our kids. When I first came in, like some of them didn't want their friends to know they were on the bowling team. Yeah. And we've kind of been able to change that culture to where, we're wearing our gear to school on game days. We're inviting friends to come watch us. We're proud to be on the bowling team. It's not this avant-garde niche sport as much anymore, where it's actually, something that they're taking just as seriously as any other kid in any kind of more traditional sport would do. Yeah.
And what do you think has inspired that change?
I think it's what Chris and I have been able to do with the program is just make it fun and make it, not legitimate's the right word, but just feel like any other sport. And Chris and I both have backgrounds in soccer, and I think that comes into play too with the way we approach our bowlers, is that they kind of get to see what that we show them that same traditional athlete experience that we experienced as soccer players, because I think the bowlers deserve to have that just like everyone else.
Yeah, can you kind of dig into that a little bit more about your approach coming from soccer? Because obviously, like I play soccer, or I've played soccer, and I know it's very much different than bowling, just looking at the two. Like one's very much individual versus like a team. But at the same time, bowling is very much still a team sport, but also it's very much you're still in your lane. Like it's your job, your one thing. You're not like bowling 2 balls down the same lane or anything like that, right? So like how have you like merged the philosophy or brought soccer, I guess, coaching into bowling?
Yeah, it's just the competitiveness and losing the silliness. When I first kind of came in, there would be kids kind of maybe throwing the ball between their legs or something, or just like kind of, because bowling is a recreational activity for most people. Yeah. And so a few people, when I first came in, were kind of like here to just have a good time. And so we made that clear, is that our goal is to have a good time. That's why we do it. But our goal is to get ourselves better and the people to our left and right better every day. Yeah. And so by shifting to that mentality and to really having, I'm an extremely competitive person. So I think having those values instilled in the bowlers as well, and now they're hungry for wins. That kind of shifted us to more of a recreational style fun program, to like, no, we're here to compete. And we're one of the few programs in 3A that has a girls and a boys state championships. Like we're an elite program, and we're here to represent that proudly. Yeah.
Going into kind of that transition between the two, because obviously you started in 2020 or around COVID year, and then you won in 2022 as the plaques all around your room were saying, right? So what was like the thing that made that team different? Was that like one of the first teams that you had, or like the beginning before it finally like all set in of like it's a bit more of something serious? Because as you said at the beginning, it was kind of a bit more like unserious, and you kind of like pushed it into serious. Like what was kind of that team?
So my first year we qualified for state, which they hadn't for a couple of years, if I recall, like 2 or 3. So that we were just happy to be there.
Yeah.
Then my second year, the year we went to state, it was just a different mentality of the boy. They weren't just happy to be there. The boys were there to compete and do their best. We were ranked maybe 14th or 15th going into postseason. So
14th or 15th?
Yeah. So
holy upset.
It was a big upset. Yeah. And the reason they were able to do it was not because they were the best bowlers there. They were very good. We had a very talented team, talented enough to win, obviously. But that's not what put them over the edge. Those boys loved each other, cared for each other, and would have done anything for each other. And I think that was what put them over the edge, was that they were just an absolute unit.
Mm-hmm. How did you like either help cultivate that, or was that more like them just coming together and it was just like a very special group of dudes?
I'm able to help just with kind of team building activities, that type of thing. That's kind of the side I do. I do a lot of the cognitive coaching. My assistant, Mike, is an amazing bowler. He does a lot of the technical side of things, which allows me to focus more on what's this bowler thinking? How can I help him have the right mindset, and how can I help him come together?
Yeah. So
I think having the two of us balanced really gives the kids each side of the coin that they need to be successful.
Yeah. How much? So I talked to Roberts about the whole mental side, and I plan to talk about it with you too, because like there's the two difference. But how much? I mean, do you find it difficult at all, or like how do you help balance the difference between the highly technical, which would be your assistant coach, and then like the highly mental side of you?
And so yeah, that's why my approach to bowling is so much different than soccer, because I have so much content knowledge in soccer. And I've coached that for like 15 years, but I actually think I might be a better bowling coach because I don't have all the answers. Mm-hmm. So we have to figure it out together, or the boys have to turn to each other, or they have to go talk to Coach Mike. So I'm just not this conduit for information that they need, like, help do this, do this. Yeah. I'm more of a guide, and I'm able to help facilitate a session rather than be the one that's totally the one that's going to say, this is how it is 100% of the time. Now, I do that with maybe values, but not so much with the content of bowling, which I think gives the kids the flexibility to try different things, and knowing that I'm not going to jump on them if they tried something and it didn't work. And because they have that freedom, I think that gives them that confidence. Yeah.
Well, what kind of the values, or I guess you could say, I guess as the coaches, the pillars or values that you would want to instill on the boys?
They actually came up with a mission statement on Friday, and I'm trying to remember the exact wording because we just wrote it down together yesterday as we voted for captains, and it was something along the lines of, our mission is to, that has a team that thrives on confidence, and dang it, what is it? An unwavering support of one another. There was a couple other things that were listed too, but that's my favorite thing about that statement that they came up with together, is that they want to compete, they want to do well, but it all circles back to the unwavering support of one another, and that they are honestly here showing up for each other. And they're showing up for themselves to improve, but what keeps them showing up is the person to their left and right.
Yeah. So kind of going into like, I guess the mental side of bowling, because a lot of people, whenever they just overlook the sport and it's like, oh, it's just a recreational thing, don't really realize how much of it's mental and all of its tiny adjustments. And it's very different from a sport, because like you can take a second after you bowl and you can stop and you can realize and actualize what happened. Maybe it curved that bad, it was like your footwork or something wrong, compared to like basketball or soccer, where you shoot the ball and you're not going to like stand there for like 5 seconds and be like, how is my footwork? Did I hit the ball with the right part of my foot? Like, you kind of just have to get back into the game, and it doesn't really process, which is why you like watch film as a soccer athlete. But like, I'm guessing you probably don't watch films for bowling, but how do you help athletes internalize, but then also like figure out themselves? Because like you're your own best coach, and if you can try to like help figure them out and everything like that.
Yeah. You're very correct that bowling, after a physical movement like a shot, is a lot different than soccer. You have a lot of time to think and ruminate. especially in a Baker game, you're going to have 4 other people shoot before you go. In an individual game, you're going to have probably at least 3 other people. So you're going to have some downtime. And that circles back to why we value the coming together and coalescing as a team so much, because you're not stuck on an island. You've got 2 other guys that are at that table with you. You can be like, hey, man, this is what just happened with my ball. Usually reacts this way. This was my mark. And they can be like, hey, why don't you try moving your feet here? Why don't you change your mark here? Maybe it's time to go to the other room and make a ball change. Or they just need the confidence to say, hey, you just pulled it. Just you'll do better next time. So you're absolutely right that it's an extremely mental sport. It's whoever has that best focus and the ability to fight through the adrenaline, because your heart's going to be racing at certain points, and still be consistent with the shot every time. Yeah.
How do you help them manage the adrenaline or manage the pressure during certain moments?
Every kid's different. So there's some that need to kind of process by themselves, and we just give them time to do that. There's some that want to come and talk to me or Mike and process that way. And like I said before, there's some that they want to turn to their teammates, and that's what's going to make them comfortable. So every bowler is different. I'd like to encourage you to turn to your teammates, because I feel like that's the best, but that's the best for me. I have to remind myself that there's some kids they need to have some time on their own before they can have those conversations and before they're ready to kind of process what just happened.
Yeah. Would you say one of the hardest parts of your coaching is like the difference between everyone, and like you can't just, I mean, obviously that'd be the same thing with a lot of sports, but like, is it like one of the hardest parts, like the fact that not everyone is the same, you know, like cookie cutter answers and replies for everyone?
Yeah. Managing personalities is big. Just like with teaching, I mean, you've got a bunch of different personalities and you've got one philosophy, but you're going to have to approach each of those individuals differently to get, even though it's the same philosophy, which sounds weird, I know. But yeah, I can think of, especially in some years past, where and when we were split with ADM, you've got kids that are literally geographically split. So it made for some challenges, but it also strengthened our program. But I am very, very excited to have a team that's kind of all in the Milwaukee area, that all these boys all know each other, and that we don't have some of those geographical kind of limitations.
Yeah. Well, how much would you say like ego has a part in like your ability to coach them, and just ego in general in the sport of bowling?
Ego is a thing in bowling for sure. I don't know how much you've watched, but the professionals trash talk. They get loud. What's the famous line? Who do you think you are? I am. There's some pretty famous trash talk
Porter used to say that all the time.
Oh, yes.
Oh, my God.
I'm glad we got to talk about Porter a little bit.
Yeah.
One of the best teammates ever, by the way. Shout out to Porter. But yeah, it's you want that excitement, and so you just have to sometimes reel it in. So I can think a couple of years ago where I had a kid that was getting pretty loud at the meet, and almost to the point where it's like, okay, are you shouting to pump yourself up, or are you kind of shouting to kind of like at the other team?
Intimidate almost?
Yeah, and it's a little different, I think, if you're shouting at someone versus like at yourself. So sometimes you have to have those conversations. He doesn't mean anything by it when kids do that. They're just excited. But it's also not a good look for the program if you're screaming in someone's backswing. So just got to calm them down every now and then.
Yeah. Is there any like story or anything like that where like, or just even around the championship or whatever, where like you kind of realized like this thing is going to work and you guys are going to be successful, and you guys, like, what was kind of your eureka moment?
The time when I knew it was going to work was my first year, and it wasn't because of me. It was because I had a really cool group of dudes that had been in the program for 3 or 4 years. They were all buddies, and they took it seriously. I think those are the guys that really turned the program into a different direction. Even before I got here, they were starting to be the guys that were like, you know what, we're taking this seriously. We're going to be proud of this. So I think of kids like Cameron Borst. This was like 5 years ago. He'd be out of college now. Joseph Barnes III, he was a huge one. He was actually a soccer player and a track athlete. So he was a 3 sport athlete with bowling, which is actually pretty rare.
Yeah.
We had some great ADM kids on that team as well. Justin, Seth. We had just a group of guys that were there for each other and that wanted to get better, and we're kind of done with the clown show. They were done with the, hey, we're not here to mess around. We're here to get better. And they were the ones, I think, that they introduced me to high school bowling. So it was my first time, and they introduced me to how it should be done. And so I kind of tried to keep taking those values forward.
Yeah. What kind of lessons did you learn from that like first year of guys?
I guess my biggest thing I learned was that you, just like in the classroom, like if you have a question, like turn to the kids or turn to the bowlers, like a lot of the answers are there. So I turned to those guys a lot as to, hey, like, how's the meet work? Or, hey, like, what do you think's best for practice? I've got these ideas. So it just reminded me that it should be a player-centric situation. And because I had such little knowledge about the high school aspect of the sport, it really did have to be them in the center of things.
Yeah. How much would you say is your decisions like 60-40, 50-50, 80-20 is your, like, I make the decision versus like I ask the players and get the impact? And obviously I feel like you'd get like feedback and more at like their decision versus like your decision.
Yeah. And we just yesterday, we voted for captains. So we do that through a Google form anonymously. So there's kind of no bickering that way, which there never would be. But they vote for them. Then Mike and I take a look at what happens, and ultimately we make the decision. So we take the player input, but I do think it's important that you have someone at the top that's making the decisions based on all of the data. We still delegate a lot of kind of tasks to our captains and to other players, so they get some say and some power as well. But I think it should fall on the coach finally, after hearing everybody out, to be like, okay, here's the decision. I've made it. Because I feel like if I put it on a kid, now I'm putting a little too much on them, especially if you've got some kids that disagree with that situation. Now, all of a sudden, there's maybe some hurt feelings and that type of thing.
Yeah. So kind of looking at the future of the program and this year upcoming, what can we kind of expect from the team?
I didn't even expect a lot from this squad. They're a talented team, and they're a team that has put in the work. Almost all of them work at Warrior Lanes. So they bowl every single day together. So practice is really nice because we don't have to worry about getting a huge volume of shots, and we just are kind of working together. We get to do a lot of Baker games. We get do a lot of things with smaller volumes of shots because they get so many outside of practice. So because they're so seasoned and they're working so hard and they've come together, we have some pretty lofty goals this season. And I would not be surprised if they hit every one of them.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for coming on the show and everything like that. And it was a great opportunity to be able to talk to you.
Thanks for having me. And you make sure to say hi to Porter for me.
Of course. Yeah.
All right.